I'm wearing a bow tie. You know what that means. It's time for another Joseph Unick video essay. Now this is the first video essay I've done since film school. And since I have been to film school and I've seen probably the greatest and most artistic films we have in the entire world, I figured I would start my postgraduate video essay debut with Green Acres. Now you knew that clicking on the video title, but I figured I'd go ahead and set that up like it was going to be a Bible joke anyway.
Green Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me.
Running from 1965 to 1971 and executive produced by Paul Henning as part of his Beverly Hillbillies and Petticoat Junction universe, the sitcom Green Acres follows New York attorney Oliver Wendell Douglas and his Hungarian socialite wife Lisa as they move to the rural town of Hooterville and become farmers, and how they struggle to adjust to their quirky new neighbors, such as Eb Dawson, their hired hand, or Mr. Haney, the shrewd businessman, or their neighbors Fred and Dora Ziffel and their son Arnold, who is a pig. So technically he's not their son, but everyone still treats him as such. So basically it's a reverse Beverly Hillbillies. Instead of country people moving to the city, it's city people moving to the country. But interestingly enough, the Beverly Hillbillies was not the first show that Green Acres reminded me of. When I first watched it, the show that came to my mind was Gilligan's Island. Instead of the down-to-earth, character-based humor and heart of the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres went in a more weird direction. Some would say it's a surreal direction. They just did whatever crazy stuff that came to mind. It seems as if the writers just had random thoughts that popped into their head and said, why not? We'll just put that in there.
Well, the fellow that wrote it, Paul Henning, said we could do anything we want to it as long as he doesn't hear about it.
It's pretty reminiscent of Gilligan's Island, how they're both very crazy, stupid, out there shows. One show would have man-sized spiders, while the other show would have a talking horse. One show would have voodoo, while the other show would have a ghost. One show would have an evil scientist with mind control rings, and the other show would have the son of a World War II veteran messenger duck dancing to Hungarian gypsy music.
Lisa, I can't work with all this.
The late 1960s were an interesting time. But it feels like the writers with Gilligan's Island, if someone were to ask them, why is it so weird? They would say, don't know, don't care. But Green Acres felt just a little bit different. It felt like the writers would say, we do know it's weird, and we do care, but we're gonna keep it weird. We'll just embrace it. There was just a different quality to it, and it felt self-aware. So I thought it'd be interesting to analyze this self-aware quality to the humor of Green Acres. But first we need to define what self-aware humor is, at least for television shows. So we'll go with this definition here. Self-aware humor is best seen as whenever the writers acknowledge some aspect of the show that they've created and let the audience know about that particular aspect through the guise of the fictional story, in a humorous way. Now everyone knows the type of self-aware humor known as breaking the fourth wall. This is when the characters become aware that they are actually inside of a television show or movie. But there are several different kinds of self-aware humor, and Green Acres sports a bevy of them, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So for this video essay, I'll be going through Green Acres and showcasing 4 types of self-aware humor it exemplifies. This is Green Acres, and something about self-aware humor. I'll come up with the title later. Okay, we'll go with the first level, the first type of self-aware humor Green Acres has, and this is the fourth wall breaks I was talking about. This is known as self-awareness of the medium, where the show points out that in fact we are watching a television show. The most famous one in Green Acres is the character's awareness of the opening credits.
Whose names are those?
This running gag started in season 2. Lisa and the natives of Hooterville see the credits and become familiar with the names.
Oliver, wake up.
What? What's the matter?
Do you know anybody called Jay Summers or Dick Chevrolet?
Who?
Well, I was just dreaming that their names were over us.
It's 5 o'clock in the morning. Will you go to sleep? Dreaming their names are...
However, Oliver can't see the names, which, interestingly enough, fits in with the characters. Lisa seemed to be the most empathetic of all the characters, in the groove of the town and all its eccentricities. She even talks to all the animals as if they were human, so it makes sense if these opening credits are one of the eccentricities of the town, Lisa will be much more in tune with that. However, Oliver is the straight man, the scientific mind who's always going against the grain. So having the characters acknowledge the credit is an okay joke. I mean, it's fine. But the writers in Green Acres take it to another level by having certain characters acknowledge the credits in ways that fit with their own personalities and their established place in the show. In a similar vein, Lisa and the neighbors also talk to subtitles whenever they may pop up. And again, that's an alright joke. But the writers still remember to actually do something with it and create more jokes within the jokes. Like, for instance, misspelling the subtitles to account for Lisa's accent. Or take this scene, where the characters pause in their dialogue just so you can read the subtitles.
Egyáltalán változtál meg? No. I said you haven't changed a bit. We have a lot of trouble here with the subtitles.
But one of my absolute favorite self-aware jokes of the medium is in Season 1, Episode 25, Double Drick, when the generator goes on the fritz and starts making loud noises. Or at least we're told it does, but instead of actually hearing anything, the sound goes dead, and we, the audience, are treated to Batman-esque on-screen onomatopoeias, which the characters comment on.
It sure makes a lot of noise.
And then they just go and make up words that aren't even onomatopoeias.
What was that trick? I thought I saw...
And then at the end of the episode, they double down on it. There's not much to comment on, it's just, I really like that gag. So these are just a few of the examples of how Green Acres become self-aware of the medium. And I think they serve as good examples of not just acknowledging the medium, but actually doing something with it and taking that joke to another level. Speaking of other levels, there are other levels of self-aware humor. We did the first one, being self-aware of the medium, but what are some other ways in which a television show can exhibit self-aware humor? The next one we're going to look at is a show's self-awareness of its own continuity. Now, television shows of this era didn't really care all that much about continuity. After all, no one could build their own home archives of different episodes and go back and watch for different details. So, oftentimes you'll end up with things like Lucy and Ricky having multiple backstories of how they met.
Bet there's just been a mistake, and I made it 15 years ago when Marion Strong asked me to go on a blind date with a Cuban drummer, and I said yes.
Would you fellows like to earn $10?
Yeah, what do we have to do?
Escort 2 young ladies around town and show them romantic Havana.
My name is Susan McNamara.
McNamara.
And this is Lucy...
McGillicuddy.
So I was actually really surprised at how, throughout Season 1 of Green Acres, they were able to maintain continuity, especially with the building of the house, and how they kept adding different renovations. But then the backstories came in, the weakness of all sitcoms. And in Season 2, Episode 1, we got our first glimpse of how Oliver and Lisa met. And so it was said that Oliver's engine conked out when he was in the Air Force in World War II, and he landed in Hungary, where he met Lisa, who was working with the Hungarian underground. But then, just 7 episodes later, in Season 2, Episode 8, Lisa and Oliver tell Eb the story of how they met, and this time, it's established that Oliver met Lisa aboard a ship. And then they went to have a date in a fancy restaurant where Oliver accidentally ordered too many champagne bottles.
Champagne?
Champagne? Wait, I did order champagne.
The lady said champagne.
Could I have some more champagne, please?
There you are, sir.
Why did you order another bottle? We didn't drink the first one yet.
As I was saying, my nose is on fire!
Oh, my goodness!
What did you do that for?
Well, you said your nose was on fire.
Why did you throw the champagne?
Now, it's important to note that Lisa originally got the story about the ship wrong, and it was Oliver who had to remind her that the first time he asked her out on a date was aboard a ship.
That time in Paris at the restaurant, you sat at one table and I sat at the other, and you sent the waiter over to ask me for a dance. He was a pretty good dancer for a waiter.
The first time I asked you for a date was on board ship. I remember distinctly.
And it's also important to note that Lisa says Oliver's champagne story was slightly exaggerated.
You exaggerated that story.
Not much.
I didn't realize it at the time, but that started establishing something very important. From this point on, the backstory starts flip-flopping. In Season 3, Episode 10, Das Lumpen, it picks up right after the story in Season 2, Episode 1, where Lisa meets Oliver during World War II. She hides him from the Germans inside of a barn, and then they part ways and don't meet up again until sometime later after the war. They meet again at a cafe, and then Oliver goes to her father's house to ask if he can marry her. But he is shunned because he doesn't have all that much money.
I checked your credit rating, and I don't think you are son-in-law material. Permission denied.
Then they reunite in America after Lisa goes on a cello tour and Oliver fights her boss. Now, it's established that Lisa lied about at least the last half of that story at the end of the episode.
Well, it doesn't matter. Now that I found you and you found me and we found each other and we can walk into the sunset.
Hold it!
What did you stop the story for?
Oh, that's not the way it happened. I never heard such nonsense.
Well, I don't think it's nonsense. I saw something just like that the other night on the Late Late Show.
Yes, I think my wife saw the same movie, The Broadway Gaieties of 1938 with Slim Somerville and Sally Eiler.
That solidifies the very interesting thing the writers are doing here. They're establishing Lisa as an unreliable narrator.
It was a lot more romantical than what really did happen.
Oh, what was that?
Nothing. Her father changed his mind and we got married. It's as simple as that.
And so they became aware of their discontinuity, and so they're letting us know that they're aware of that through this joke that Lisa can't tell a straight story. And this gets repeated every other time that there's a backstory on Oliver and Lisa.
Where did you first meet Mr. Douglas?
Yeah, where did I meet you?
You don't remember?
Not this version.
Now again, just acknowledging that there's discontinuity is fine. It's an okay joke. But again, the writers take it to a whole nother level by introducing common threads. Remember that champagne gag? It's repeated all the way at the end of the series in Season 6, but it's in a completely different context.
Like a drink, huh? Beer?
A bottle of champagne.
No, I don't want...
There you are.
I said beer.
I'm sorry. Once you open the bottle, it can't be returned.
Well, would you like some?
I'd love some. Another bottle of champagne.
Well, I didn't...
You really didn't have to order another bottle. I would have been happy to share yours with you.
Just get me a bowl of pretzels.
What?
Pretzels.
Now, that's really interesting because in real life, when two people are lying about the same event, but there's any common element between the two, you can almost guarantee that that's actually a grain of truth in their story. And so we get this idea that we don't know exactly how Oliver and Lisa met, but with all these common elements, we can sort of construct this real-life story behind all the lies. We can guess that they met sometime during the war. Lisa was working for some Hungarian underground. We know that they met sometime after the war and didn't recognize each other at first, but then Oliver must have asked her out on a date on board that ship, and they went to some sort of Paris-themed restaurant where he ended up ordering too much champagne. But it's not just how they met. There's also another backstory element that the writers play with. Lisa says her mother was a queen and her father was a king, but she flip-flops on this too. In Das Lumpen, it was established that Lisa's father was a rich man who rejected Oliver because of his finances, but then he later changed his mind and allowed them to get married. but there's no mention of royalty. Then later, in season 3, My Mother the Countess, Lisa claims that her mother is a countess, and the king, not her father, but the king made her so because Lisa's father had dirt on him. But Oliver insists she's not a countess.
She's just a little Hungarian lady who makes a few francs playing Batrac or baccarat.
In season 4, episode 2, a new version of Oliver asking Lisa's hand in marriage is shown, and this time we see that they eloped, or at the very least, tried to elope. Perhaps they did try to start to elope, and it coincides with Das Lumpen, and once the father saw them trying to elope, he changed his mind and allowed them to get married. In season 5, episode 1, where Lisa's mother comes for a visit, it's established she only recently became a countess in real life.
Oh? How did that happen?
Why, she bought a villa in Italy with 14 bedrooms and 6 baths and a countessship.
They had a palace for sale, too. If I had bought that, I would have become the Queen of Sicily, but it didn't have any bathrooms.
In season 6, episode 1, Lisa brings up the idea that her father was himself the king.
When I was a little girl, he let me sit on the throne and Mary's king hat.
Fine.
We used to play all sorts of games, like lock the Duke in the dungeons or choose the Prime Minister.
Later in season 6, episode 3, she tells a fictitious story of how her father was dethroned and they fled to Paris. But this story has some common elements with the other, more truthful lies she's told, such as the champagne gag. And in this version, Lisa meets Oliver in Paris. And this time, instead of just being concerned for his daughter's welfare, the king is interested in Oliver's finances because he wants him to raise enough money to build an army to retake the throne.
Have you got enough left to finance a retake?
A retake?
An overthrow.
An overthrow?
He's not too smart.
Well, you see, Oliver, my father was thrown off the throne, and he needs some money to get rid of the bad guys.
Oh, now I get it. This is some kind of a con game you two are playing?
So, we know he was interested in Oliver's money, but was it social status or raising funds for something else? And last of all, 3 episodes later, Lisa admits her father wasn't a real king.
You see, he looked very much like the real king. So every time there was a revolution, they'd shove my father out on the balcony and they let them shoot at him. That's the way he worked his way through college.
Which is actually really cool because the real-life last king of Hungary was in power until just about when Eva Gabor's parents were college age. So the historical timeline actually makes sense. You take all these facts, all different, but with similar elements, and your mind starts to build this lattice work of a puzzle trying to piece together what's real, what's not, the Hungarian king, Lisa's father, political unrest, the countess, the gambling, Paris, taking back the throne. It all adds up to a certain story. And I think that story is Lisa grew up in the Hungarian mafia. Like, her father worked with the king during college and then used his political influence to gain illegal power after the dissolution of the monarchy. Lisa's family controlled the illegal gambling of the elite and rigged the system to get Lisa's mother enough money to buy the villa and countessship. Lisa was such a naive child, she mistook her father's kingpin position in the mafia as a legitimate kingship and blindly followed him along in all of his criminal endeavors.
We used to play all sorts of games, like lock the Duke in the dungeons or choose the Prime Minister.
Gosh, that got dark quick. Okay, I have no idea how much of that stuff the writers actually had in mind when they wrote it, but it is really cool to see how they acknowledged the discontinuity and let the audience know about it through the joke of the unreliable narrator. And it's that combination of the unreliable narrator and the common elements between the lies that gives this backstory a real credibility, and it allowed them to do whatever crazy stuff they wanted to for a joke. This is pretty sophisticated stuff for television of this era. So we've seen how stories can be self-aware through the medium and through the continuity. Let's take it one level deeper by looking at self-awareness of the rules of the world. By rules of the world, I mean, how do things operate? How do people behave? How do things get done? What's the tone of the story? Is it realistic, where everyone behaves in a believable, real-world manner? Or is it cartoony, where animals can talk and people fall off 100-foot cliffs without getting hurt? Green Acres has a very interesting, unique tone right in between the two. This is best exemplified in Arnold the pig, the pet, though treated sometimes like a son, of the neighbor's Ziffel. Arnold is a very human pig. We see him turn on a television, deliver papers, and play checkers. Yet we actually see a trained pig do these things, and while the end result may sound wild, in action, it looks kind of tame and grounded. That's what Green Acres is. You know, technically it could happen, but it never would in the real world. It's larger than life, but it still has a tether to reality. My definition of self-aware humor was whenever the writers acknowledge some aspect of the show that they've created and let the audience know about that aspect through the guise of a fictional story. So how do the writers let the audience know of the tone they've created? They do it by deviating and then at the very last minute bringing it back to the status quo through some sort of joke. Oftentimes, they would stretch the believability to very cartoonish levels, but they would leave just a small thread anchoring it back to a more realistic tone. One of the big cartoony gags was Mr. Haney conveniently showing up to the Douglases' place trying to sell something they happened to need for that episode. How would he know what they needed? In Season 3, Episode 12, Mr. Haney brings a cradle for Mr. Douglas to buy based on the assumption Lisa had had a baby. When asked about it, he responds,
"Everybody in the valley heard her hollering for you to boil hot water last night."
How could they have heard that?
Whenever the wind blows in just the right direction, you can hear everything that goes on here.
And suddenly, all those cartoony gags of him bringing the convenient stuff suddenly makes sense. That one joke, that one simple line suddenly brought a tether to reality back to this huge cartoony running gag that they'd had going. One simple line. It's really subtle, but that's all they needed. They go even more subtle in Season 5, Episode 23, The Beeping Rock, when Lisa buys a supposed moon rock. The big gag of the episode is that the rock beeps anytime it's in moonlight through some sort of moon magic. And at the end it's revealed that NASA has a whole stash of beeping moon rocks. Initially it seems right out of Gilligan's Island, but you'll notice the rocks don't start beeping until after this scene where they turn out the lights and go to bed, meaning the entire second half of the episode could be a dream, if you want it to be. My absolute favorite example, however, is the talking horse in Season 4, Episode 13, The Birthday Gift. Mr. Haney sells the Douglases a has-been TV star horse named Mr. Fred. Get it? And of course it turns out Mr. Fred can actually talk. It's not like Arnold, where he can understand human speech commands like a dog, and will occasionally get subtitles so we know what he's thinking. Mr. Fred can speak to humans in an audible English voice, which is a direct violation of the sort of realistic tone the Green Acres episodes go for.
Now, eat it, settle down, and go to sleep.
How about a blanket?
The blanket. I must be hearing things.
Like what?
I could have sworn. Oh. Oh! Oh!
Good night, dummy.
At first I thought the writers had completely given up, and were just doing whatever crazy junk flew into their mind. But at the end they do something very clever. Oliver finds out the horse can talk, and then tries to tell his wife and friends. They think he's crazy, and Lisa gives him some liquor to calm his nerves.
As I walked out of the barn, he said, "Good night, dummy."
There. You'll feel better in the morning. There.
Dummy.
Now, it had been a running gag in previous seasons that everyone in Hooterville had accused Oliver of being some sort of heavy drinker.
What a romantic story.
Is that the way it really happened? Exactly.
How is it I don't remember any of that?
Because you were always stoned on champagne.
He'd always been indignant, but he never actually denied it. And, to my recollection, this is the only time we see him take a drink. And it's a little bit shocking. It stands out in our minds. And we as the audience start to wonder, why would they show us that? Well, I think it's a signal. I think it's the writers letting us know that Oliver actually has been a heavy drinker all this time, and the horse can't talk because that would be a violation of the rules of the world. Instead, it's all just a boozy hallucination in Oliver's mind. Now, I know that may seem a little bit far-fetched, but I think the writers knew what they were doing. So we've seen self-awareness of the medium, we've seen self-awareness of the continuity, we've seen self-awareness of the rules of the world. I'm going to leave y'all with one last self-aware type of humor. This one gets a little meta. This is self-awareness of the joke. In Season 1, Episode 19, Sprained Ankle Country Style, Oliver sprains his ankle and is laid up in a bed for a while. He's very hungry. but he needs people to bring him food as he's immobile. While people try to bring him food, they become engrossed by the movie he's watching on television, Frankenstein Meets Mary Poppins, and they forget to give him the food, and instead eat it themselves while watching the movie. First it was Mr. Kimball, then Mrs. Ziffel, Alf and Ralph Monroe, Lisa his wife, and even Bobby Joe Bradley from Petticoat Junction comes in with some food. Bobby Joe, a main character from a completely different television series, makes a special appearance for a crossover episode, and she has literally nothing to do in the episode except bring Oliver a basket of fried chicken and then eat it all in front of him. That's brilliant. It is oh so stupid, and I love it oh so much. Now obviously it's a bit out of character for everyone to ignore Oliver like that, but it's a joke, so whatever. Finally, Oliver hobbles out of bed to hide in the barn.
Oliver!
In here!
Oliver, what did you come out here for?
A little peace and quiet.
That wasn't very nice, with all these people coming to see you.
They came to see the picture.
They came and they all brought you food.
Yeah, and they ate it.
Wait, what? Is Oliver actually acknowledging that they were acting out of character? No. You're not supposed to do this. You see, sitcoms will sometimes sacrifice character for a joke, and they do it way more often than you would think, since the basic structure of a joke is setup and subversion. An already established character serves as that setup, and so an action out of character seems funny and works as a joke. Oftentimes, especially shows of a less realistic bent, will make their characters behave contrary to common decency or logic. But that's where you cut. You move on to the next scene, or the end credits, so you not only end on a laugh, but the audience doesn't have to live in a space where the characters have taken on a noticeable shift.
Whoa, is he okay? Do you think maybe we should go after him?
He seems really worked up. Is that banana loaf?
Oh, yeah. You guys want some?
Oh, yeah. But the Green Acres writers say, no. These are characters we've established. They're acting out of character. We need to acknowledge this. We need to address it. Now watch how this scene plays out.
That wasn't very nice, with all these people coming to see you.
They came to see the picture.
They came and they all brought you food.
Yeah, and they ate it.
It isn't who eats it, it's the thought.
Well, maybe. But at least they came to see me. In the city, nobody would do that. You remember that time in New York I had that cold? I was in bed for a week, nobody came near me.
I did.
Yeah, and you caught my cold.
Did you see that? They didn't just deny what happened, they actually acknowledged it and used it to develop the characters. Well, characters such as they are, Paul Henning shows were never known for their three-dimensionality. But it helps grow the Douglases' appreciation of moving to the country and helps cement their decision, and it also ingratiates the side characters to us, because if we know that they care about the Douglases, we care about them. So those are just a few of the examples of how a television show or other medium can use self-aware humor. Now there are other types and examples of self-aware humor out there, but these are the ones I saw the most common in Green Acres. And to be honest, Green Acres isn't the best example of self-aware humor out there. In fact, VeggieTales probably has better examples.
How are we clapping? I have no idea.
Green Acres isn't perfect. It's certainly not the funniest sitcom of the era. And for every point I mentioned here, there are plenty of times Green Acres broke the rules. When the credit gag started, Oliver did notice the names. There are plenty of inconsistencies and other side plots besides the Douglases' backstory that never gets explained. There are a few select episodes where the tone goes cartoony with no lifeline to believability. And character is sacrificed plenty for a joke. So why would I bother making a video essay on Green Acres? Well, for one thing, there seems to be no Green Acres video essays in existence. So I figured I may as well get in on the ground floor, as I'm sure Green Acres video essay is a very popular YouTube search term. But besides that, Green Acres will always stick in my mind. Why? Because of the subtlety with which they used self-aware humor. For the most part, I was just ready to write it off as another Gilligan's Island, and then all of a sudden there would be one little line, one little gag inside of an episode that would bring me back and say, I see what you're doing there. And every that right there is investment. That's a connection between me and the writers. Every time they can make me feel special, like I've just gotten a slight sneak peek into behind the scenes every time they make me think just a tiny, tiny little bit more than I would have originally, I gain 10 times more respect for the show. I become all the more willing to give them the benefit of the doubt when they don't deliver a stellar product because I know they know what they're doing and they can do it and will do it eventually. And if you use self-aware humor in your projects or writings or whatever you're doing, you will also gain the respect of your audience. But not only that, if you're studying your own work intently, trying to find subtle ways you can let your audience know you're aware of what it is, you will become much more familiar with what your work is and what it stands for than you would have otherwise. It will strengthen your writing or your art or your film, whatever you're doing, and you will turn out a much better product for it. And that's my video essay, everybody. Thanks for sticking with me. This is my first video essay since college and it's been quite a while, so I don't know how well I did. So leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Also, I'd like to do more of these things again, so leave a comment below and let me know if you have any ideas for other video essays I can do. Also, if you have nothing of import to say and you just feel like typing random things, leave a comment below and let me know what that random thing is you typed. Alright, that's all I have. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. See you later. Enjoy this groovy outro music.